The night was alive with red and blue lights, and the sound of shouting officers reverberated through the narrow streets of a small town in North Carolina. A teenage boy lay on the ground, his eyes wide with fear, a single bullet lodged in his shoulder. He was unarmed, with nothing but a bag of groceries in his hands. As his father, once a highly trained Delta Force operative stationed at Fort Bragg, sprinted toward him, rage and determination burned bright in his eyes. In that moment, a single question ignited a storm of vengeance. How could this happen, and who would pay? John Fisher had returned home from his final tour of duty in Afghanistan just a year earlier. He had served with the Honest Special Forces Operational Detachment, Delta Force, out of Fort Bragg, participating in Operation Enduring Freedom. There, amid the craggy mountains and dusty roads, John had honed the skills that had made him a top-tier soldier: precision, strategic thinking, and unwavering courage. He had taken these experiences, the good and the bad, and kept them locked away inside him, never thinking they'd resurface in his hometown of Riverton, North Carolina. When John stepped off that plane for the last time, a weary fatigue clung to him. The crisp, welcoming air of home did little to soothe his nerves. If anything, it reminded him how vastly different war-torn battlefields were from the calm lanes of suburban America. But John had a mission, one far more important than any in his military career: to be a father to his 15-year-old son, Marcus. Riverton was a modest town. Its main street was lined with old brick buildings, a family diner, and a gas station that doubled as a gathering spot for locals. The tight-knit community had its share of complicated histories. There were those who held progressive views, welcoming John back with open arms, aware of his sacrifices. Others cast side-eye glances, carrying whispered biases and old resentments. John's older neighbors remembered him as a quiet, disciplined young man, but to the younger crowd and some local police, he was an unknown figure, looming with a certain intensity. A black man who had served in an elite special operations unit was enough for them to cast suspicious eyes. Despite any side chatter, John's main focus was family. He rented a modest ranch-style home on the outskirts of town. With each day, he worked on repairing his bond with Marcus, who had spent much of his life with only sporadic visits from his father. It was not a simple father-son relationship. Marcus was grappling with the confusion of having grown up without a consistent father figure, and John was unsure how to connect as a civilian. But they had time now. Time to watch football games on the weekends, time to teach Marcus how to fix cars in the driveway, time to heal. Yet, some ghosts lingered. At night, John would wake up drenched in sweat, haunted by memories of teammates lost and the endless tension of watchful nights in distant combat zones. Sometimes, the slightest noise from the backyard would send him creeping through the house, stealthily checking door locks with the same quiet focus he'd used on Black Ops missions. Marcus would wake up and see him, concerned, but John would only muster a small, reassuring smile before telling him everything was all right. And, for a while, it was. In Riverton, the local police department was small, just under 30 officers. Most of them had been born and raised in the county. Some prided themselves on being tough on crime, although real crime in Riverton was minimal at best. Still, the presence of a stoic, highly trained black veteran unsettled some of the more tight-knit cliques within the department. Rumors circulated around the station. He's a government-trained assassin, or he could snap at any second. Paranoia has a way of festering in small communities, especially when faced with the unknown. Marcus, now 16, became the unintentional target of that suspicion. He was a lanky teenager with a soft-spoken demeanor, a fan of comic books, soccer, and video games. But his quiet, introspective nature was often misread by those who saw only stereotypes. A couple of times while riding his bike, Marcus was pulled over without cause by officers who claimed he fit the description of someone else. They'd ask him questions about petty thefts that happened miles away. Marcus would come home, eyes burning with resentment, telling John what happened. Each time John would calmly remind Marcus to remain respectful, to keep his composure. "We'll handle it the right way," John assured him. "We have the law on our side." But in a town like Riverton, that wasn't always guaranteed. The night everything changed, Marcus had been out buying groceries from a nearby convenience store. It was dark, the street lamps casting yellow pools of light on the pavement. He balanced a paper bag of milk, bread and eggs in one arm while scrolling through music on his phone with the other. In the quiet hum of the neighborhood, the roar of an engine broke the peace. A police cruiser barreled around the corner, lights off until it was nearly upon him. Marcus froze. Two officers, Officer Bradley and Officer Morse, stepped out. Bradley was known around town for having a short fuse and a tendency to escalate situations. Morse was new to Riverton, still learning the local culture, but he often followed Bradley's lead. "Hands where I can see 'em!" Bradley shouted, shining a flashlight directly into Marcus's eyes. Startled, Marcus dropped the groceries. The milk carton burst, splattering white liquid onto the pavement. Bradley interpreted the quick movement as a threat. "I said, keep your hands where I can see them," he shouted again, voice trembling with adrenaline. Marcus stammered, raising his hands. "I'm just going home, sir." That should have been the end of it, just a random check, albeit grossly unfair. But Bradley's hand was already on his gun. His suspicion was ratcheted up by the rumors of criminals passing through town and the notion that a young black teen out at night could be up to no good. In a chilling moment, Bradley's finger squeezed the trigger, discharging a round that tore into Marcus's shoulder. Marcus crumpled to the ground, his own blood staining the shattered eggs and spilt milk. John had been pacing at home, mildly concerned that Marcus was out later than usual. Then his phone rang a neighbor, breathless, telling him to come quick. John didn't drive, he sprinted. He tore down the sidewalk, his heart hammering in his chest. He could see the glow of red and blue lights dancing on the houses ahead. As he rounded the corner, he saw a crowd forming. In the center, Marcus lay on the ground, tears streaming down his face. John's instincts took over. He rushed forward, ignoring the shouts of the officers. He checked his son's pulse, found him stable but losing blood, the boy trembling. "What did you do to my son?" John roared, looking up at Bradley and Morse with an expression that could cut steel. Bradley raised his gun again, a reflex of fear. But John's eyes flashed with the lethal focus he'd brought to missions overseas. Before Bradley could finish raising the weapon, John disarmed him with a swift, practiced motion, twisting the gun free and tossing it away. Gasps erupted from the crowd as John pressed 2 fingers to Marcus's wound to stem the bleeding. He was in survival mode, ignoring everything else. "Call an ambulance!" he shouted, voice echoing. "Now!" Even in the chaos, John remembered to breathe. The paramedics arrived in minutes, loading Marcus onto a stretcher. The red lights bathed the street in a surreal glow as they sped off, sirens wailing into the night. The police officers, rattled, turned on John. Bradley, humiliated and incensed, began ranting incoherently about John assaulting an officer. But the onlooking neighbors had seen everything. Some had recorded it on their phones. Bradley's story was on shaky ground from the start. News of the shooting spread through Riverton faster than lightning. In a town where so little happened, an officer-involved shooting was a monumental event. The next morning, local station WRIV interviewed witnesses who detailed the story of an unarmed black teenager being shot. The footage from smartphone videos circulated on social media, exposing Bradley's immediate aggression. Discussions turned to protests. John, though deeply shaken and furious, remained as composed as he could. Marcus was recovering in the hospital, the bullet having missed any major arteries. It was a terrifying ordeal, but the boy would live. John spent every waking moment by Marcus's bedside, while local activists and reporters started to gather outside, demanding answers. The hospital room became a revolving door for community members, some well-intentioned, some merely curious about the spectacle. A detective named Elizabeth Carter from the State Bureau of Investigation was assigned to the case. She came by to interview Marcus when he was well enough to speak and to take John's statement. John was forthright, providing every detail. Carter seemed professional, but there was a guardedness in her eyes, like she was trying to thread a needle between truth and the unspoken pressure from local law enforcement. Meanwhile, Officer Bradley was placed on paid administrative leave pending the investigation. His union rep made statements on local news, insisting it was an unfortunate accident and that Bradley feared for his life. Such claims ignited the town further. After all, how could a boy carrying groceries inspire mortal fear? People posted signs around town, reading justice for Marcus. Over the next days, John felt the tension build in his soul like a coiled spring. Memories of his time with Delta Force swirled in his head, specifically the times he'd had to navigate moral grey zones. He remembered missions where local villagers had been mistreated by corrupt officials, and how John's team was sometimes the only hope those people had. Now, ironically, back home, it felt like he was once again dealing with a broken system. One particularly restless night, John found himself pacing the hospital corridors while Marcus slept. He wandered outside to the parking lot, where the headlights of passing cars lit up the darkness. Overhead, the stars were bright, a stark contrast to his turbulent thoughts. That's when he was approached by a small group of men in civilian clothes. John recognized them as old friends, fellow veterans from his time in the army, who'd heard about the situation. People talk, especially in close military circles. Some had driven hours to show support. They spoke quietly, acknowledging the injustice. One of them, a tall man with a salt and pepper beard named Frank Ramirez, had served alongside John during Operation Enduring Freedom. He offered to help. "Anything you need, John. Just say the word," Frank said, placing a hand on John's shoulder. The solidarity was comforting, a reminder that John wasn't alone in this. But he was also cautious. He didn't want a vigilante standoff between trained special operators and a local police department. He wanted justice, not a bloodbath. Within a week, John found himself at the center of a legal battle. Officer Bradley claimed John had assaulted him, twisting the narrative that he had simply defended himself against a dangerous suspect. Meanwhile, local activists and civil rights groups urged John to file a lawsuit against the Riverton Police Department. A well-known civil rights lawyer from Charlotte, Patricia Nguyen, reached out to offer her services pro bono. John accepted, aware that navigating the justice system without expertise would be a minefield. Weeks rolled into months. As Marcus healed, John and Patricia gathered evidence, phone footage, eyewitness statements, and the ballistic report that showed the bullet trajectory. Detective Carter, bound by the demands of her job, struggled to remain impartial while local political forces weighed in. But slowly, the truth seemed to be surfacing. Bradley had acted recklessly, motivated by prejudice and fear. In depositions, Bradley's story began to contradict itself. He claimed Marcus was acting suspicious and had lunged at him. But multiple videos showed Marcus simply standing there with groceries. Officer Morse, for his part, was racked with guilt. Pressured to defend his partner, he tried to paint the incident in a more justified light, but the truth hung in the air like an anvil. Tensions rose within the police department. Some officers viewed Bradley as a liability, while others closed ranks around him, determined to shield him from accountability. One crisp autumn morning, John and Patricia presented their evidence to the local district attorney, Leonard Hart. Hart, an older man with deep roots in Riverton's political structure, seemed sympathetic on the surface. But behind the scenes, he was inundated with pleas from the police union and local politicians who wanted to bury the story. The entire town's reputation was on the line. A turning point arrived when the DA's office announced that, due to insufficient evidence, they would not be pursuing criminal charges against Bradley. The news hit the community like a thunderbolt. Protesters filled Main Street, chanting for justice. Marcus, though still nursing psychological scars, joined the marches, determined to no longer live in fear. John felt his faith in the justice system crumble. The message was clear. Real accountability was unlikely unless they fought harder and perhaps took matters into their own hands. But John was not a man to be bullied into silence. Back in his small, cluttered garage, John dug out a locked trunk from beneath a tarp. Inside were relics of his time in Delta Force, a battered Kevlar vest, old mission logs, and photos of him with his unit. The trunk also contained an encrypted flash drive. He plugged it into a laptop, scanning through his personal files. Within minutes, John found what he was looking for, a contact list of investigative journalists, military lawyers, and old allies who specialized in exposing corruption. He picked up the phone, heart pounding, and dialed a number. The man who answered was Gideon Palmer, an independent journalist known for uncovering military scandals and government abuses. Gideon had a reputation. He was fearless, relentless, and had ties to major media outlets. John didn't mince words, explaining the entire saga. That phone call set off a chain reaction. Gideon arrived in Riverton days later, armed with cameras and a small research team. He interviewed John, Marcus, witnesses, and even tried to get a comment from Bradley. Each door that slammed in his face spurred Gideon on. Over weeks, he compiled damning evidence footage, depositions, and revealing statements from local officials who spoke under anonymity. Gideon also discovered that Bradley had a history of misconduct in previous counties, though it had never been made public. Within a month, Gideon published a lengthy expose on a major national platform. The headline read, "Delta Force Veteran Fights for Son's Justice in Alleged Racially Motivated Police Shooting." The story went viral. Suddenly, the Riverton Police Department found itself under a microscope. Civil rights organizations launched petitions demanding a federal investigation. As public pressure mounted, the tensions in Riverton boiled over. Officer Bradley, feeling cornered, refused interviews and holed up in his home outside of town. But even some of his own neighbors started to question him. The phrase "hard karma" was spray painted across the sidewalk outside the police station, symbolizing the community's belief that the reckoning was coming for Bradley and all complicit in the cover-up. Amid the storm, Detective Carter finally broke her silence. In a confidential tip to Gideon, she revealed evidence that had been suppressed body cam footage that showed Bradley and Morse discussing how to spin the story before paramedics arrived. The footage also captured the moment Bradley fired on Marcus for no reason other than a panicked assumption. Carter couldn't legally release it directly, so she leaked its contents anonymously. When Gideon published the details, the backlash was immediate and fierce. Public outcry grew deafening, protests escalated, and calls for Bradley's arrest became unignorable. Eventually, the Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped in to review the case. With the new evidence, the DA's office had no choice but to file charges of obstruction of justice, filing a false report, and use of excessive force. Bradley was arrested at his home in the early hours of a chilly Saturday morning. He glowered at the cameras, hurling insults and blaming a smear campaign. The ripple effect also spelled the end for the local police chief, who resigned under mounting pressure. Officer Morse, facing disciplinary action, resigned as well, providing a statement that partially absolved him of the direct shooting but acknowledged complicity in the cover-up. It was a turning point. Some might call it the karma the townspeople had been chanting for. In the end, the legal system, spurred by undeniable evidence, began to work. The State Attorney General's office took over the prosecution. Despite attempts by Bradley's lawyers to paint him as a man under siege, the facts were clear. The bullet that pierced Marcus's shoulder had no justification, and the attempt to hide it was equally damning. While Bradley awaited trial, another shocking revelation emerged. He had been involved in previous questionable shootings in a different county. Those cases were quietly settled out of court, sealed away by legal agreements. This pattern of behavior tore away any remaining sympathy. In a dramatic twist, the police union withdrew their support, leaving Bradley with little more than his own bravado. Meanwhile, John and Patricia Nguyen negotiated a settlement for Marcus's injuries with the Riverton Police Department's insurance company. Part of the agreement required policy reforms, mandatory body cameras for all officers, de-escalation training, and a citizen review board to oversee complaints. Though John initially resisted a settlement, preferring a full court case, Patricia convinced him that these reforms could spark long-term change. Marcus, who had once dreaded stepping outside in his own neighborhood, began to find a measure of closure. Still haunted by nightmares, he started therapy. John, determined to empower his son, taught him self-defense, not so Marcus would seek violence, but so he could carry himself with a firm sense of confidence and security. Riverton was never the same. The shooting had exposed deep racial tensions, forcing the town to confront issues that had long simmered beneath the surface. Some people resisted the calls for reform, claiming the media had overblown the incident. Others recognized it as a necessary reckoning. Activists established a community center that offered after-school programs and legal advice. Marcus became something of a local spokesperson for youth empowerment, speaking at events about how to handle encounters with law enforcement. His words weren't about hatred or revenge, but rather accountability and unity. This unexpected leadership role helped the town heal, bridging gaps between neighbors who had grown apart in fear and ignorance. When the trial against Bradley finally began, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, local residents, out-of-town supporters, everyone wanted to witness the conclusion. Over the course of 2 weeks, testimonies were heard. Marcus, shaky but resolute, took the stand and described the terror of being shot while unarmed. Bradley's defense portrayed him as a stressed officer facing a life-threatening situation. But the body cam footage and phone videos left little room for interpretation. His fear was baseless, and his actions were reckless. In a pivotal moment, Officer Morse, testifying under oath, confirmed that Bradley had fired without provocation. He wasn't threatened, Morse admitted, his voice trembling. I couldn't believe what I saw. The jury deliberated for just a day. They found Bradley guilty of assault with a deadly weapon and obstruction of justice. Sentencing would come later, but the conviction itself felt like a monumental victory for Riverton and for all communities where people had been fighting to hold rogue officers accountable. In the aftermath of the verdict, Bradley's supporters, few as they were, seethed with anger. Some claimed the system had turned on a good cop, but the majority of Riverton breathed a sigh of relief. For too long, a handful of officers believed they were above the law. This ruling proved otherwise. Marcus left the courthouse that day, leaning on his father's shoulder. John, who had once carried the weight of the world in war zones across the globe, now felt a sense of peace wash over him. This had been the hardest battle of his life, harder than any firefight in the deserts of Afghanistan, because it involved his son's life, his family's future. And although their journey through the justice system had taken months, the outcome signaled a pivotal change. Detective Carter, seeing the case to its end, resigned from the local bureau and moved on to a different position. She remained in contact with John, occasionally updating him about efforts to overhaul investigative procedures throughout the state. Patricia Nguyen returned to Charlotte, championing more civil rights cases bolstered by the wave of public support. Gideon Palmer, the journalist who broke the story, garnered national recognition and continued his mission of uncovering wrongdoing wherever it lurked. Weeks turned into months. Marcus's wound healed, leaving only a small scar near his shoulder, a grim reminder of that night. He excelled in school, joining the soccer team as soon as he was medically cleared. Eventually, he started speaking at youth conferences about his story, always emphasizing that change is possible with resilience and unity. John, too, found a sense of purpose. No longer battling sleepless nights and the ghosts of war, he turned his attention to community service. He volunteered with local veterans groups, offering mentorship to soldiers returning home. He taught them how to channel their experiences into positive outlets. He and Marcus also held workshops on interactions with law enforcement, bridging the gap between officers who genuinely wanted to serve and residents who had reason to fear. Though John would never forget what happened, he chose a path of cautious optimism, believing that vigilance and unity could pave the way for a safer future. In Riverton, policy changes were slow but real. New officers were held to stricter scrutiny, and the town elected a mayor who promised genuine transparency. With each passing day, the shockwaves of that single gunshot reverberated less as fear and more as a call to action. For John Fisher, a Delta Force veteran who once risked his life in the harshest corners of the world, this battle at home had become his defining mission. He was a soldier once more, but this time fighting for justice, equality, and the promise that no father would have to watch his unarmed child bleed in the street. And so ends the saga of John Fisher and his son Marcus, a reminder that heroism isn't limited to distant battlefields. It can happen in our own backyards. From the moment a bullet struck Marcus down, John's unbreakable resolve set a powerful example of standing up for what's right. Their courage, combined with the tenacity of allies like Patricia Nguyen, Gideon Palmer, and their countless neighbors who spoke up, forced an entire town to confront its flaws and inspired reforms that will resonate far beyond Riverton. If you found yourself moved by this story, please show your support. Like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear stories that shine a light on both injustice and hope. Your voice amplifies tales of courage and accountability, proving that when we stand together, we can turn tragedy into meaningful change. After all, the fight for justice belongs to us all.